So, one of the brilliant things about C.S. Lewis is that before he even tries to convince you of anything, he kind of lays out the whole map. He takes a step back and sorts through all the major ideas people have about God. And, just watching him do that, just following his logic, is really fascinating stuff. Yeah, and he gets right to the point, doesn't he? He starts with the question that pretty much everyone asks themselves at some point: what is God really like? I mean, is there a God at all? And if there is, what's the deal? This is ground zero for his whole argument. Okay, so Lewis kicks things off with this first huge division. He basically says you can sort everyone on the planet into one of two big groups, and it all comes down to how they answer that one basic question. And what he points out is that, look, the huge majority of people all throughout history have believed in some kind of god or gods. The folks who don't, the materialists, are actually the minority. So right out of the gate, the Christian position isn't some strange new idea. It's actually in line with what most of humanity has always thought. Right. But Lewis says, okay, just believing in a god is only the first cut, because inside that massive group of believers, you find another huge split. There are two just completely different ideas about what that God is actually like. And this first big difference he points to, it's all about morality. Is God good, or is God something totally beyond our human ideas of good and evil? So on the one hand, you've got the pantheistic view. Think of philosophers like Hegel. Their idea is that God is, well, beyond good and evil, that our human labels of right and wrong, they just don't apply. But then you have the Christian view, which is also shared by Judaism and Islam, and it's the total opposite. It says God is righteous, he is good, he's not neutral at all. He takes sides. He loves good and he hates evil, period. And you can see how this plays out in the real world. A pantheist might look at something awful, like cancer or a slum, and say, well, if you could just see it from God's point of view, you'd get that this is also part of God. Because if everything is God, then, well, everything is God. It's all just part of one big divine reality. And Lewis gives the Christian response to that, and it's pretty blunt. He says that's damned nonsense, because if God is good, then anything that's evil is, by definition, against his will. To say that a cancer is also God, well, it just doesn't compute. These two views are completely at odds with each other. There's no middle ground. So that whole moral question leads right into the next big difference, and this one is about God's relationship to the universe. Is God the one who made the universe, or is God in the universe? Is he the universe itself? The Christian view is straightforward. God created the universe, he's distinct from it, separate from it. But the pantheist says something different. They'd say God animates the universe, kind of like how a soul animates a body. For them, the universe pretty much is God. If the universe blinked out of existence, so would God. And Lewis gives a great analogy here. He says God is like a painter, and the universe is his painting. Now, you can look at the painting and say, wow, the artist really put himself into this. But the painter is not the painting. He's separate. And if you burn the painting doesn't die, right? He's still there. And what Lewis shows is that these two ideas, God's morality and his relationship to the world, they're not separate. They really hang together. See, if you think God is beyond good and evil, it's pretty easy to then say, well, everything in the world is just part of him. But if you believe that some things are really, truly evil, then it just makes sense that God has to be separate from the world and that this evil stuff is going against what he wants. All right, so after he's sorted out the different ways people believe in God, Lewis circles back to atheism, and he brings up this really interesting paradox, something that he said he struggled with himself. So Lewis is really open here. He says, look, when I was an atheist, my biggest argument against God was that the universe is just so cruel and unjust. But then, he says, a question hit him right between the eyes. How did I even get this idea of just and unjust in the first place? To call the world unjust, I must be comparing it to some standard of justice. So where did I get that from? And his analogy for this is perfect. He says, you can't call a line crooked unless you have some idea of what a straight line looks like. It makes perfect sense, right? So when an atheist says the world is unjust, they are, without even realizing it, appealing to a standard of justice that has to come from somewhere outside the messed up world they're complaining about. And this brings him to a killer conclusion. If your idea of justice is just, your own personal opinion, something you made up, then your whole argument against God falls apart. Because for your complaint to mean anything, to say the world is really unjust, and not just that you personally don't like it, you have to believe that a real, objective standard of justice actually exists. So, with all that groundwork laid, Lewis then shows us what this means in practice. What's the consequence of believing in the Christian worldview? If you've got a good God, separate from a world that has real evil in it, well, that demands a certain kind of response from you. He calls Christianity a fighting religion. And he doesn't mean picking up swords or anything. He means it's a belief system built on a really strong conviction that this world is God's good creation. But man, things have gone seriously wrong with it. And not only that, but God has tasked us. He's given us a job to be part of putting things right. Yeah, and this isn't just some polite suggestion from God. Lewis says God insists, and insists very loudly, that we get to work. It's a command. This is completely different from the pantheist who might just shrug and say evil is part of the big picture. No, the Christian is told to stand up and confront what's wrong. So after all of that logical breakdown, Lewis leaves us with this, a final thought to chew on. If he's right, if there is a good God who made a good world that has gone off the rails, and he's calling us to do something about it, then this isn't just some philosophical game. The real question for us is, what in the world needs fixing, and what are you going to do about it?